Treasury Secretary Larry Summers has been raising red flags in regard to inflation. And I wanted to be fair to him because the media narrative of the argument that he's trying to make has been twisted into something that he's not saying. In fact, if you're watching corporate news, cable news, it's very likely that you'll hear them argue that Larry Summers is worried about how the federal government is providing too much social spending and how that leads to inflation. But that's actually not what his argument is. We're gonna get to his argument in just a second, but here's a little montage of cable news hosts basically twisting what Larry Summers has been saying.
Larry Summers, he pointed this week to the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan that was passed earlier this year in March. He said that's a major reason behind the rising inflation, something he called at the time, quote, the least responsible macroeconomic policy we've had in the last 40 years. Is it possible that Americans are suffering now from high prices because the Biden administration overstimulated the economy with all of this money going into the economy?
The inflation thing is so real that everybody acknowledges it now.
And of course, it's not just Republicans. I mean, Larry Summers has worried about it openly, and Joe Manchin worries about it quite rightly. And the problem Joe Biden has is that it's going to affect the passage of Build Back Better.
They've already created a lot of harm this year with the previous $2 trillion package they passed earlier this year without a single Republican vote. It created raging inflation, which Larry Summers, the last honest Democrat in town, admitted was going to happen, predicted was going to happen. So the best way to sum up the impact of this package, if the Democrats pass it, and of course it'll be all by themselves, is they double down on all of the mistakes they've already made this year.
Yeah, well, I thought you put it well. I mean, and Larry Summers deserves a lot of credit.
Now, Larry Summers just published an op-ed in the Washington Post, and it is fascinating how he explicitly mentions that he doesn't think that doing away with the Build Back Better agenda is the right solution to tackling inflation. Now, he does say this: excessive inflation and a sense that it was not being controlled helped elect Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan and risks bringing Donald Trump back to power. And look, to be fair, he does get a few things wrong in this op-ed. For instance, he argues about the price of oil, saying that the price of oil, the most important global determinant of inflation, is very high and not expected by forward markets to decline rapidly. He probably should have mentioned the fact that the OPEC cartel manipulates the price of gas by basically holding back production of oil. Didn't mention that, but whatever. He mentions that oil is or gas prices are inflated right now. But he does have this moment of clarity, and this is the relevant part. He says this: let's not compound errors that have already been made with far too much fiscal stimulus and overly easy monetary policy by rejecting Build Back Better. The legislation would spend less over 10 years than it was spent on stimulus in 2021. Because that spending is offset by revenue increases and because it includes measures such as childcare that will increase the economy's capacity, Build Back Better will have only a negligible impact on inflation. Instead, what he focuses on in his op-ed is the Fed's monetary policy. And guess what? He's exactly right about that. Let me give you his argument real quick, Cenk. He says the Fed should signal that the primary risk is overheating and accelerate tapering of its asset purchases. What he's referring to right here is what's referred to as quantitative easing. Given the house price boom, he writes, mortgage-related purchases should stop immediately. Because of inflation, real interest rates are lower. As money is easier than a year ago, the Fed should signal that this is unacceptable and will be reversed. The focus is on monetary policy, and he's actually right about that. But you have cable news pundits and anchors taking his words and twisting it to apply to social spending by the Biden administration.
Yeah, so I know there was a lot of financial terms in there, but let's boil it down a little bit further. So just to be absolutely clear, Larry Summers is saying the heart of the problem is the Federal Reserve printing too much money, okay? That's the monetary policy, okay? So he says specifically in the op-ed that Build Back Better will have only a negligible impact on inflation. So almost no impact at all. And he explains why, because it's already paid for, etc. So they took, I know, right? They took that statement and twisted it to say, oh, Build Back Better is what's going to destroy inflation, and Larry Summers, right? So, guys, the reason why that's so important, and by the way, it's almost all the press. Here's a Mediaite article, and I generally like Mediaite, but this is the headline, Clinton Treasury Secretary warns Democrats that dismissing inflation, quote, risks bringing Donald Trump back in 2024. That makes it sound like if you pass Build Back Better, that's gonna lead to inflation. And Larry Summers, the Clinton person, is warning you, the Democrat is warning you, you better not do that, because that's gonna bring Donald Trump all the way back. Because you have to always tie it back to the boogeyman, right? And so Larry Summers half intends that because he thinks if I just mention Donald Trump, everybody will pay attention. And the thing that they'll take away from this is if you don't listen to me, Trump's gonna come back. So that part worked out perfectly for him. But the second part, they just took his words and twisted it.
Totally.
And so why did they do that? Because the media cherry picks its experts. They could have taken a progressive expert. By the way, you say, oh, well, yeah, but Larry Summers is a big guy and well-known and credible because he was Treasury Secretary for Bill Clinton. So what? Robert Reich is an incredibly credible economist who was the labor secretary for Clinton. So you could take Robert Reich's articles and everybody could be talking about Reich says pass it and it'll help the economy. Reich says pass it, it'll help the economy. But they never quote him. They only quote Larry Summers, and then on top of that, they cherry pick within Larry Summers' op-ed, and in fact twist it to mean the opposite of what he said.
It's so fascinating.
And so why does almost everyone in the media do that? From Fox News to CNN? Because they don't want you to pass a bill that could raise corporate taxes. And so they're trying to kill that bill in every way imaginable with every dirty trick they have in the book. They never did any of that when they were giving $4 trillion to the largest corporations in America.
Yep.
There was no fear mongering, there was no cherry picking, etc. So now you see what the agenda of corporate media is. It's to help corporations, not you.
He even writes this. Financial regulators, he writes, need to step up and be attentive to the pockets of speculative excess that are increasingly evident in financial markets. And I mean, look, it's hard to know what he's specifically referring to there, but as we've seen, 2021 has been a record year for corporate stock buybacks. It has been a record year for private equity firms buying up single family residential properties. We just did a story about how Zillow is looking to offload thousands of homes that it acquired as part of its home flipping venture that didn't work out so well for it. So, there's all sorts of waste and bad behavior at the very top. There's the monetary policy that provides cheap money to corporations and to banks, of course. And of course, this is meant to provide liquidity. I just think it's all super, super fascinating stuff because again, most of his focus, as it should be, has been on the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve has had the biggest impact in regard to inflation in the housing market. Because where do you think the private equity firms got that easy money from? It's because of the Fed's monetary policy, right?
And so last two things for me on this is that also think about the argument that the press is making. You have to listen to Larry Summers, even if they were telling the truth about what Larry Summers said. You have to listen to Larry Summers, otherwise Trump will come back. Well, who did Larry Summers advise earlier? Hillary Clinton. Did Hillary Clinton beat Donald Trump or did she lose to Donald Trump? So they're saying, now remember the one person who lost to Donald Trump, their top advisor is telling you how to not bring Trump back. Well, we wouldn't have Trump in the first place if it wasn't for people like Larry Summers and all the Clinton advisors. But it's amazing how they twist the facts in mainstream media. We're not talking about Fox News here. This is alternative facts on mainstream media. Well, if you don't want to lose to Donald Trump, you have to listen to the Clinton people who lost to Donald Trump. Amazing. And then finally, I'm going to give last words to one of our members because it's such a great point. TYT.com/join. to become a member and be part of the show, right? Or you can hit the join button below on YouTube. Sexy Speed Racer wrote in, no mention of the unfunded $2 trillion in tax cuts for the rich and corporate under Trump contributing to inflation, not to mention the deficit and national debt. That's a great point, guys. Because we mentioned the trillions they gave to corporations under COVID relief earlier. He's talking about the Trump tax cuts. So we've talked about how it adds to the debt and deficit, but he's adding a really good point there, which is, wait, if you're worried about inflation, there's a good way to get money back into the government and out of the economy, and in a way that is fair and just. You would raise taxes on corporations and the ultra wealthy that Trump cut to the tune of $2 trillion. That's a great way of bringing down inflation. So is a single cable news anchor talking about that? None, zero. Have any other papers written about that? No, because if it's the rich, they must be protected. Only you have to make sure that you cannot get any benefits of that bill. By the way, every one of them now also talking about how no, the wages are too high. It's contributing to inflation. I've now read half a dozen articles where they're like, the wages shouldn't be this high, lower the wages. That's what's causing inflation.
Well, look,
and then they say, by the way, I'm sorry, Anna, they say, okay, how are people going to afford milk and gas? And our solution is take away their wages. Oh, come on. You guys don't care about the average American. You're a bunch of liars, almost every one of you. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.